right, we're set. And I will actually, I'll bump this up just even a little bit more. So hopefully it's more legible, but yeah, lots of code. It's a big room. So thanks everybody for coming. I'm so excited to talk to you again. So I guess it must have not been so bad for at least some of you. You decided to show up again. So my name is Kent C. Dodds, and I am a full-time educator. I created Epic React.dev, testingjavascript.com, and I'm working on epicweb.dev. Well, I'm planning on teaching you everything that I know about web development. The idea is I want to make you an epic web dev. And yeah, interestingly, I just noticed, I guess I never updated this. So let's add that. It's epicweb.dev. There we go. I want to make you an epic web dev. Okay, so the title of this talk is Stream Away the Wait. It's a story of pending UI. We're going to follow kind of progressively make our pending UI better for a particular user experience. My slides are all here on GitHub. So these are just markdown files. I'm using my editor because most of the time we're going to actually just be coding, which should be kind of fun and interesting. So to get things started, actually, you know what? Before, I won't leave Ryan's face up there like that. I'm not going to do that to you. Just kidding. Before we get started, I do think that it is useful for us to move our bodies a little bit. And so again, I'm not going to make you stand up, but if you could just stretch a little bit for me. And over to one side. And over to the other. Awesome. Yeah, that's good. Good to get our bodies moving. This is science, folks. Like, more blood flow, that's better for your brain. You'll think better. So there you go. All right. So this is me and Ryan. After Render ATL last year, we went to Six Flags because we were in Atlanta. That's what you do, is go to Six Flags, right? So we had a great time. We rode this roller coaster called Daredevil, and we showed up like an hour before close, and so basically nobody was there. It was like a weekday, I think, and so we sat on this and went through it twice. They just like, yeah, sure, go again. There's nobody in line, and it was a blast. And our experience today is going to be a bit of a roller coaster. We're going to make some things better, some things are going to get worse, and eventually we will land in a good place with React 18 and streams. So raise your hand in here if you are using React in production today. Okay, so most of you. Keep your hand up if you are using React 18. Okay, great. For the rest of you, maybe this will motivate you a little bit to upgrade to React 18 because what we're doing today is enabled by React 18 streams. And it's really, really awesome. So this is the app that we're going to be looking at. This might be familiar to some of you who have gone to remix.run because this is our demo app that is on there that will show you some of the features that Remix has to offer that are really great. And I implemented this myself, and we're going to be using this to show what a pending UI can be. And it's using Remix. Full disclosure, I was technically a co-founder. That's what I was called, but I joined like a year after it was founded. But I like participated in discussions before. So it was kind of a weird thing. But I'm no longer at Remix because I want to be full-time educator on Epic Web Dev. And Remix just yesterday was announced was bought by Shopify, so that's exciting for all of them. I'm really, really excited about the future of the framework Remix. And I've never been so excited about building for the web than when I started working with Remix. It's amazing. So we're going to be using Remix today. Don't worry if you don't have experience with Remix. That's totally fine. This will maybe whet your appetite a little bit, and you might want to try Remix after this because it's pretty rad. That's it. That's my slides. So now we're going to be live coding the rest of the time. So let me close all these down. And I've got the app up and running right here. I'm going to bump up a couple things here. I should have done that beforehand, sorry. Okay, so we're going to be spending most of our time in the network tab of our DevTools and on this page, this customers page. So we've got a list of customers on the left, and that updates the customer that we're showing on the right. And right now, we are not actually loading any data for these. You can see the URL is changing, but nothing else is happening here. So, and yeah, it's going to there's going to be a lot of this, so hopefully that doesn't bother anybody. So where we're at is in this customer ID route. So we're inside of this app routes dunder app. That's what's called a pathless route in Remix. So it is a router as far as the UI and layout goes, but it's not involved in the routing as far as the URL goes. You don't really need to worry about that. Then we're in /sales/customers/customer ID. So that maps to the URL that we've got right here. Whoop. Sales, customer, customer ID. Okay? So that's the file that we're working in. And the particular part, the particular part of the UI that we're working in is just right here. I don't have time to talk about nested routing as much in this talk, but you can rest assured that our dunder app is responsible for this part of the UI. The sales portion of our URL is responsible for this top portion. The customers is responsible for this list. And then the customer ID is responsible for this piece. And that's just nested together. And it's amazing to work with that type of mental model for routing. Awesome. OK, so we've got our component. And right now it's just using hard-coded data. And then we've got our loader. And that's the piece that's responsible for getting some data for us. So we need to actually get the customer information, both the customer info as well as the invoice details for this customer. So I'm going to, instead of returning just a random response, I'm going to return a JSON response. This is a utility from Remix Run Node that will create a response object that has the right headers and everything set. So we're going to say, yeah, it's get customer info. And then, and that's our customer info property here that we're using in our UI. And then we have our invoice details. That's, oh wait, guess, customer invoice detail. Come on, there it is, from customer ID. Awesome. So our backend, this is, loader only runs in the backend. So our backend is actually a Prisma backend using SQLite, and it's great. For those showing up a little bit late, if you can't see the code, feel free to come up. There are plenty of spaces. And I see some really nice faces up here that you can sit next to. OK, so the loader is responsible for talking to the database, getting the data, and then sending it to the UI. And then the UI can grab it using a hook from Remix Run React. So use loader data is what it's called. We can type it nicely with type of loader, and it's amazing. So we get nice type safety across the wire. I've got lots of thoughts on that. I've written about it on epicweb.dev. If you go to the articles there, really, really cool stuff. Type safety across the network chasm. It's fantastic. OK, great. So if we save this and then come over to our UI, now everything is awesome except for, I don't know what that is. What? Oh, I bet I know what that was. Don't worry about it. That was demo issues. OK, cool. So we're all set. We're loading the actual data. Now, here comes the interesting bit here. So far, we're not showing any pending UI at all. And interestingly, it's actually important no matter how fast you can make your backend, because our backend is really fast and it's awesome right now. But no matter how fast you can make it, people can always be on a slow network connection, and you have no control over that. Not just slow, but also unreliable and stuff. So you got to think about those things. So if I click on this, then the URL changed. But it takes a while for us to get that data for some users. So you always have to think about pending UI, unless you're doing something that's like works completely offline, I suppose. But for most of us, where the data is coming from the back end, you need to think about pending UI. Can't avoid it. I don't care how fast you think your back end is. You can't control the user's network. So I'm going to turn that off for now. And we're going to actually simulate a slow back end to make this a little bit easier by going into this get customer or the invoice details, and we're going to slow this down arbitrarily with the await new promise. Yeah, that's what I wanted, Copilot. Thank you. Except we're going to make it a little bit more interesting by saying times math.random and make it at least 1,500 milliseconds. So it's going to be between 1,500 and 2,500 milliseconds of delay just getting this piece of data. Okay, so we come back here. And I click on that, and I'm waiting, and I'm waiting, and I'm waiting, and waiting. My network's fast. Everything's good. It just takes at least 1,500 milliseconds to get there. That's not cool. I don't like that as a user. So we want to provide a nicer pending UI for our users. And but before we get to that, I think it's important to talk about some other things that we could do to speed this up. So first of all, here's my first tip for you. Don't do this. So that'll speed it up. But another thing is, think about how you're accessing your data, and the fact that we've got a waterfall going on here where we're saying, hey, we're going to wait for this, and then we're going to wait for that. Imagine if this one also took a second and a half. Now that's at least 3 seconds waiting for all that data. We could parallelize this or run it concurrently. I don't know the difference between parallel and concurrent. Everybody tells me when I get it wrong, and I still don't get it. So I'm sorry, I don't know the difference. But we're going to make these happen at the same time. That's what we're going to do. And so we're going to grab both of these, stick it up here. Whoops. I did that when I was practicing yesterday, too. That's annoying. And then we'll grab both of these and stick those right there. And then we're going to do this, and we'll thank Prettier for being amazing. I make the most terrible messes when I'm coding, and then I hit save, and Prettier makes it all nice. I was about to make a joke about people not using Prettier, but nobody doesn't use Prettier now. So, okay, so in our case, that doesn't actually help a whole lot, parallelizing, but I just wanted to call that out as one thing that you can do to really speed things up. It's just like, think about how you're accessing your data. Maybe you can access it in a more efficient way. In particular, we actually could, because this ends up making a call to our database, and that could actually do additional or request additional data. But we're just going to pretend that this is coming from an API that's slow or something. Okay, so another thing that, or the next thing that we're going to do, because we do always have to think about pending UI, is we're going to add a global pending UI spinner, so that like no matter where you are, we at least show some indication that something is happening. And this is important because we brought in JavaScript in here to prevent default on page navigations and form submissions. And when we did that, we did something kind of unfortunate. So if I say, we'll disable JavaScript here, we're going to get a server render of this page, and everything's going to work because progressive enhancement is amazing. The progressively enhanced single-page app architecture rocks. But what's interesting here is if I click on this, then I'm going to see a loading spinner right there. And so that's actually kind of nice. As a user, I get some feedback, some UI feedback on what's going on. But then if I say, hey, I'm going to progressively enhance my app, I'm going to bring in JavaScript and make it better, well, what we did by bringing in JavaScript is we actually made it worse, because now there's no pending UI when I click on this. So please, please, just add something for me. Give me something. Tell me that I am interacting with your app. So we're going to add a global pending spinner for our app. So in the app route here, this is responsible for rendering the app shell, basically. We're going to add a spinner right here, visible. We'll say it's true, just right there. So we can take a look at what that looks like. So there it is, spinning happily, and it's in the wrong spot. Here we go. Woohoo! Whee! So we've got the spinner in place. So, and sometimes you might have like a little bar that goes across the top. You know what I'm talking about. Like on my site, I have a little thing that pops up in the corner. We've got these sorts of spinners. So now we just need to determine, okay, when do we show this? And in a remix context, because remix is also your router, you reach into remix to say, hey, what's my current, like, where am I going on this from page transitions and things. So we're going to use this thing called a transition from use transition, which does not come from React. There's a name collision for you. We thought we got rid of those when we got rid of mixins, but nope. No, just kidding. Remix will probably rename it to use navigation in the future, but use transition shipped in Remix first. So, I'm just saying. So now we're going to have our show a spinner is going to be based on this transition object. This transition object has a bunch of stuff on it, like type, location, submission. If we're like submitting a form, that submission is going to have information on it about like what was being submitted and where it's being submitted, all that stuff. We're going to use the type and, the state. And if the state is not equal to idle, then we're probably loading at some point, and so we know we can show the spinner now. And so with that, now I'm going to click here, and boom, we got the spinner, and then it goes away for us, and that was kind of nice and easy. I like that. The problem is, if we have a really fast transition, like between these, we will get a flash of loading state. So what I did to combat that was I added a CSS transition delay on that spinner so that it doesn't like show up right away and it like opacities its way up. The problem with that is, like, let's say that your delay is 50 milliseconds for that transition delay. What if the request or the transition takes 100 milliseconds? Well, now you got 50 milliseconds of a flash of loading state. That's not good for the users. We don't like that. So I have had this problem for a long time. When I was coding AngularJS, what I did was I said for every network request or anything that triggered a spinner, I would make sure that if it took like 200 milliseconds, I made sure that to not resolve the promise until at least an additional 300 milliseconds had passed, which meant that the app technically was slower, but at least I didn't have a flash of loading state, which I thought was better. Now we can do actually better with actually a pretty simple hook called use delay or spin delay, which was actually built custom for my website by somebody who was helping me with building my website to solve this specific problem. So here we're going to say show a spinner, and we'll stick this inside of there. And all use spin delay does is it says if your Boolean that you've given to me is true, then I will make sure that what I return to you is false until it has been true for at least 200 milliseconds or some default number. I can't remember exactly. And if it gets to that point, then I'm going to make sure it stays true for an additional 300 milliseconds or whatever. The entire idea is this Boolean will never flash to true. It will always, if it turns to true, it will always stay true for at least long enough so you don't get a flash of loading state. So with that in place now, we avoid that problem. We're not going to get a flash of loading state no matter how fast or slow anything is. We will only get it showing up for when it needs to show up, and it will stay there for long enough. OK. That's a little bit of an aside, because this has nothing to do with Remix, but I'm just like imploring you, please don't flash your spinners at me. That's all I'm trying to say. OK, great. So the next problem here is, so here's our roller coaster again. So we're getting into a helix corkscrew thing. I don't know. But I don't think that a spinner in the corner is sufficient. I mean, it's a nice default, like good to fall back just in case nobody thinks about putting spinners everywhere. But when I click on this, I might not even notice that there's a spinner there. That's part of the problem with the favicon spinning, right? Like sometimes you don't even know. And so what I think would be better is to have the loading state in the place where the content is going to go. That makes sense. And so what we're going to do is in the parent route, this customers is rendering out all of the customers' links to like the different customers we've got. So this is the list. Down here, so this is on the right. It's going to say, here's the outlet. This is where you're going to render any children that I have. And so this customer ID is a child of this customer's parent route. So any children I have, this is where they go. So in our case, we know that sometimes customers can be slow. So we're going to add a skeleton UI to say, if the children aren't ready yet, then I want you to render the skeleton UI instead, and we'll wait until they're ready before we render the outlet. That's the basic idea. So we're actually going to copy some of this use transition stuff, and we'll stick it right here. We'll bring in use transition, again, from Remix, not from React. Completely different things. And with spin delay. So now we have show spinner. I think I'll call it show skeleton. Very spooky. Happy Halloween, everybody. And we'll stick show skeleton right here. Whoops. So if I want to show the skeleton, then I'll show a skeleton, or customer skeleton. Otherwise, I'm going to show the outlet. So if we're not in a loading state, then I know that I'm good to show the outlet. If we are in a loading state, then I'll show the skeleton. And the skeleton takes a name. We'll call this loading. And an email. We'll call this loading@loading.com for now. And we'll come back over here. And now, when I click on this, I'm going to get this loading state. So that's neat. To me, that's better. But what's interesting is a lot of the data on here we actually already have in the UI, right? Like I already got the customer name and the customer email. So why is it saying loading, like shooting this loading thing in my face? I don't want that. So instead, what we can do is there's a built-in mechanism in the browser for sending state from one route to the next, from one location to the next. It's called state. And React Router or Remix has this built in to their link components, so you can pass state from one to the next. So we have, oh, you know what? I totally forgot to talk about prefetch. Thanks, Copilot. I'll talk about that after we're finished with this. So we can use the state prop to pass the customer on to the next location. So with that in place, we can now say I have a loading, or let loading customer. And this is going to be a type of customers at well, not 0, but number. I think that's probably the same. But yeah, so it's going to be one of those customers, or it's going to be undefined because we're not actually transitioning right now. And I can say if transition dot, oh shoot, location, there we go, isn't showing up, dot state. So if there is state on this location, hold on a second. Is that, there we go, yeah. Then we can say our loading customer is going to be transition location state customer. So it's going to be the name that I provided in here. So the state is this object. It has a property called customer. So that's how I'm going to access it right here. Now TypeScript is complaining about this because it's right. I have no way of knowing that's actually a customer. We could be navigating from somewhere else. So we're just going to do this. And nobody talk to anybody who cares about TypeScript. And tell them that I did this. You all are better than that. You would do a better job of making that more type safe. So we're going to say if there's a loading customer and a skeleton, now we can give this pending UI with loading customer name and the loading customer email. So that's neat. So we come back over here, and now I click on this, and I get you know, more data. The data that I already had in the UI, I can just reuse that and have the loading state for everything else. I think that's actually quite nice. And another thing that I want to call out here is I haven't used useEffect or useState or useMemo or useCallback or any of those hooks, and that's kind of nice. I like not using those things. And this is happening all because Remix is our bundler, our compiler, and our router, and our data fetching library. And it's managing all of that stuff for us in a way that I think is quite intuitive. You know, just go to the part of the UI you want some pending state, and boom, there you go. It's quite simple. OK, so the thing that I forgot to mention earlier is also because of those reasons, because of what Remix can do for us, it actually knows all of the data requirements for your code just by looking at the URL. That's all that Remix needs is the URL, and now it knows what loaders you need to call and what CSS files you need to go get and JavaScript files, whatever else you can actually opt into additional things you want to prefetch. And so with the link, we just know, oh, OK, so we're going to go over there. Let me just go get all of those resources ahead of time. So we're going to add a prefetch intent to this link. And what that says is to Remix is when the user intends on clicking on this link, we'll go ahead and start getting all of that stuff. So with that in place, that actually helps quite a bit. And you wouldn't just apply this everywhere, because that could be wasteful. But in some key places like this in particular, I think it makes a lot of sense. So now as soon as I intend on clicking on it, Remix is already getting the data for that particular page. And if I had like CSS that was specific to this page or images or whatever else I wanted to, it would prefetch all of that stuff. So that by the time I click on it, it's already in the browser's cache. It's not in like a Remix specific in-memory cache. This is just like shoving it in the browser cache. I hover over this, I wait for the time that it takes to come back, and then I click, and it's instant. If I hover over it and then click, then it is going to fall back again. But this is just an optimization that we can make things better. And I actually have this implemented for the customers link as well. So as soon as I click on customers, it can be super fast to show that first customer. So that actually helps quite a bit. It's really nice when you separate your data requirements from your rendering. Like most of us building web apps with React for the last several years have been fetching our data as soon as our component renders. This is impossible when you do that. So it's really nice to separate your data fetching from your rendering so that you can do something like this. OK, so I am actually thrown off a little bit by that reminder. So let me just cheat really quick and take a look at my notes. So we've got our skeleton. Oh, I totally spaced on the caching thing. So here's another thing that you can do to improve things before you add a bunch of spinners and stuff, just to make things faster. sometimes you can cache for data that doesn't need to be 100% up to date to the latest. If you can even 5 seconds, have 5 seconds of a cache, then you just give the user the cache version from 5 seconds ago and then go update your cache. So every time you're getting like super fast version of stuff. Now sometimes caching doesn't always work, and you've got to, like let's say you're Twitter and you can't cache every single tweet ever. But maybe you can cache like some of the more popular ones to make that a little bit faster. So don't skip over caching like I'm about to right now. OK, so the next thing that I want to talk about is, here's the next problem that we've got. Our boss is looking at this and they're like, that's quite nice. I like how, even though it's as fast as we can make it on the back end, we can at least give the user some nice feedback that something's happening. We've got some pending state going on here. But then your boss is like, I was over at invoices and I clicked on this customer and I was just sitting there. I did have the spinner, so that was cool, thanks. But like, that's garbage. I don't like that. And the reason that's happening, of course, is because our parent component, the one that's responsible for rendering the list in the outlet, that's the one that's going to render the pending state. And so we're not there yet. So we're still transitioning from the invoices page over to the customer. So that parent component that's rendering the skeleton hasn't been rendered yet, so it can't render the skeleton. So that's a problem. We could just go a higher level up and just keep going until we have the whole app and we've got pending UIs all over the place. That doesn't sound like fun at all. So, and then on top of that, if I were to go to a brand new page, or like just land on the page, I'm waiting here for at least 1.5 seconds. That's also not great. I don't like that either. And so your boss is like, I just want it to get here right away. Give this to me. And so what most of us probably would have done before even the skeleton thing is we would have said, OK, I'll server render everything that's fast, and then I'll just I'll have the client go get the data that's slow so I can show a pending UI. And I'm not going to build that for you because it's not cool. But we're going to skip ahead to, sorry, I need to remind myself what number it is. Number 9. So this is the way that would behave. Oh, we also need to run the server. There we go. Isn't it cool how fast the server starts? Man, you remember when it didn't start like that? It's Cody loves you. This is Cody, by the way. Hi. OK, cool. So now with that, I can land on the page and instantly, I have exactly what my boss was asking for. Okay? I can go from invoices to the customers. I have exactly what the boss was asking for. This is great. Ship it. It's awesome. But there's a big problem here. Not a big problem, but like a problem that would be nice to not have. And that is, if I land on this page, I'm going to load all of my HTML. I load my JavaScript pieces. And then after all that is done and been parsed, that's when this data fetch for the customer invoice details happens. So we've introduced a waterfall. Waterfalls are not great because what this means is we have to wait for the document to finish downloading, the JavaScript to finish downloading, then have it be parsed, then evaluated, and then executed, and then we can finally make the fetch request. When we knew exactly the data they needed on that first request, when they were getting the document in the first place. We knew what they were going to need. Wouldn't it be nice if we could just somehow send that without making them wait? That would be cool. So send what we got and then send the rest later. That would be cool. That's what streaming is. So we're going to stream this. And here's how this works. Here, actually, we'll leave that open. We're going to go back and we're going to say, hey, boss, Kent just told me about the streaming thing. We're going to go back to our skeleton UI that we had before without the client-side fetch stuff. And we're going to implement streaming with Remix. So one thing that's required for streaming with Remix or streaming with React in general is in your entry server or wherever you're rendering your HTML, you're going to switch from the simple, I don't remember, or render to string thing that the React server has, and you're going to switch to render to pipeable stream, so it can stream as it shows up, and you render that way. I don't even know how this magic works. It totally works, but I didn't write it. I just copied it. Something about creating a pass-through, whatever that thing is. I don't know. So in any case, what's cool about this is that we just send the body, and what it does is it opens up a connection and just can send stuff as it comes. So it doesn't send it all and then close it. It leaves it open for the rest of the stuff that needs to show up. So with that configured, and then also, of course, your entry in your client needs to use this hydrate root feature in React 18 because that is another piece. The client side is an important piece of making streaming with React work. OK, so with that out of the way, now we're going to switch to this. First of all, we're using an experimental release of Remix. This is not currently in the stable release, but it should be in the next couple weeks. I know the team is working on it right now. So you install that, and then you have access to this really cool function called defer. Now, defer actually works just like the JSON function when you provide just regular data. So we've changed nothing. It's all operates exactly the same. But now what we're going to do is I'm going to bring this over here. We're going to say await that. And then I'm going to stick this one right here and say we're not going to await that one. We're going to give it a promise. So now this object has some properties for the customer info, and then it has a promise that resolves to invoice details, but we're not waiting for it. This is just the way JavaScript works. There's nothing fancy about here. If you await, then execution stops. If you don't, then we just get a promise, and we can deal with that later. So because we're not awaiting it, this loader now runs quite fast. Okay? So then on our UI, we're getting some complaints from TypeScript here because this invoice details is not an object. Like, it is some sort of promise thing. And in the Remix context, it actually is a promise because Remix will make a promise on the client side, which is actually quite cool. So what we're going to do is here we're going to use an await component that's coming from Remix. And our resolve, the thing we want to await for, the thing we want to resolve is our invoice details, so that promise that we're going to get. And then we're going to bring back render props. Oh, yeah, I loved render props, sort of. I had a mixed feeling about render props. It was the best we had at the time. So we're going to use a render prop, and we get the resolved version of the invoice details. So now instead of accessing it off of data, we'll access it just off of that render prop. And Remix will not render this until this is resolved. Now, we need to have a fallback, right? So we're going to say suspense from React and provide our fallback. Now, our fallback is going to be way cooler than that. So we've got our fallback, invoice details fallback. And we got to close this up. Suspense. We'll stick our await inside of that. And we also have an error fallback, but I'm not going to bother, or an error element, but I'm not going to bother with that right now because we don't believe in errors during demos. And that's it. There we go. So we also have to have the server, right? Did I stop the server? I guess I did. OK. And why do I have to sign in every time? I don't think I might be doing something wrong because I don't normally have to sign in every time. OK, cool. We have the behavior that our boss wanted, where we can go from invoices to a customer, and instantly we show up there. We have this behavior where we can land on the page, and we show it. But the very significant difference is fetching that data right there isn't waiting until the JavaScript loads and executes and fetches. It started as soon as we asked for the document. In some situations, this could save you like a half a second, maybe more. That's really nice. And in fact, if the data ends up resolving before the stream is finished, then you won't see a fallback at all. It'll just, like, there it is. Wow, that was fast. I didn't even see a pending state. And that all just happens in the background for you. You don't have to think about that. So that's cool. But what makes this even cooler, or actually one other thing that I want to mention about this, is I want you to take a look at the favicon. So no matter what you do, you're always going to have the UI loading state that the browser provides for your app when it first loads. Like when you first show up, the UIs of the browser is going to show that loading spinner in the URL or in the favicon. So watch the favicon here. We're there, but it's still spinning. It spins because the request is still open. If we look at the document request in here, it's actually quite long because that response was still open, and then it was streaming stuff in. So it's actually a very fun activity to look at view source on this because it eventually will show up with the rest of the stuff. Yeah, somewhere down here. But so feel free to go do that. It's actually quite interesting to see like, oh, here's the stuff, and then boom, it has some more stuff later. Pretty cool. But this is actually really, really significant for a lot of use cases. Think about like you're building an e-commerce platform. I'm not saying that just because Remix was bought by Shopify yesterday. Like that has always been my example. But yeah, so you've got a product page, and the reviews don't matter that much. So you don't want them to hold up your initial page load, but they do matter. So you can get them a lot faster by having it streamed in. And here's what's even cooler. So some of you are like, yeah, this is great and all, but I care more about DX than UX. And you might not say that out loud, but like, come on. Some of us do really care a lot about the DX. So let's talk about the DX here. Let's say your boss is like, hey, you know what? It'd be really cool if there was some way to make Ocean Avenue load really, or not show any pending state. Because Ocean Avenue's data, like they've got it together. We're okay waiting if they're slow, but normally they're going to be fast. So don't bother pending on that one. Or we've got some users who kind of would rather just like wait with your pending UI or whatever, or like just wait for the data before transitioning. We don't want to have it show the skeleton UI here. And so like you want to A/B test this, right? How would you A/B test what you're doing with the client-side fetching right now? You have like two completely different implementations and use which one based on which bucket the user's in. And I'm just going to tell you, A/B test is quite easy. So it should defer. Then we're going to do this. Otherwise, we'll await this. I've A/B tested it. So whatever you use to determine whether you should defer, that's it. So I've actually got an example of this to make it more concrete. So we say advance, I think. Oh, shoot, I can't remember which number it is. 11. So this is what that would look like. Yeah, come on, TypeScript, you know it's there. So now we just determined, should we defer our invoices based on the customer ID? We've got some customers that got it together, and the user ID. We've got some users in a particular bucket or whatever. So now I can come over here and say, this one's slow, but Ocean Avenue is like wicked fast. Like that is the power that you've got. Try to do that with whatever else you're using right now. Actually, don't bother, because it'd be a waste of time. It'd be really hard. So I'm really excited about this feature. It really, honestly, it blows me away what we can do with the Defer API. And then, of course, another great thing about Defer is that this is just using regular HTTP. And so because of that, we can use, you got to spell advance right, advance. We can use headers like cache control. And so if it can be cached on a CDN or something like that, or even just in the user's browser, we can say stale while we validate 5. OK, so have the user be, well, actually, most browsers don't support stale while revalidate. But if you did like a CDN, then you can use stale. The point is, this supports headers. It's not some like weird thing that Remix just threw together. This is just streaming, a nice API for using streaming that the web has had for decades. So that's pretty sweet. That's what happens when you build a framework on the web platform. So with that all said, I'm really, really stoked about what we have in the web and what we've always had and what frameworks now are using to provide us not only great user experiences, but also excellent developer experiences at the same time. So first thing, when you have something slow, try to make your backend fast. I know it's really fun to try and shave off 5 milliseconds off your rendering times and like throw use memo and use callback all over the place, but don't. I've got a blog post about that. Don't use memo and use callback all over the place. Please, please don't. Measure it first and then add it if you need it. But your backend is probably your bottleneck. If you could probably shave off 200 milliseconds off of the way that your infrastructure works. So try to make your backend fast first. But you can't avoid, and also optimize how you fetch from your backend. look forward to Deferred. It's amazing. Ryan Florence gave a deeper dive on how all this works that you can watch it from his talk at Reactathon. And then another thing I wanted to mention is I have a bunch of stickers that I put on that ridiculous sticker table downstairs. So if you want to go find some Remix stickers, I personally have a couple of stickers still too. So if you want to get some Remix stickers or things, check that out. And I think that is it. The last thing I want to say is, you are amazing. Thank you.